Well, all roads lead to this. What is up, everybody, and welcome to, finally, the culmination of my John Carpenter review series. Now, there are some Carpenter films that I reviewed upwards of 7 years ago. So I guess for all intents and purposes, this is a review series that has been slowly formulating the entirety of this channel. But a little over 2 years ago, I started with Dark Star and intended on going through every single one of John Carpenter's films. Within a couple of months, things got incredibly busy both at home and just in the YouTube world, in the movie world. And so it has taken until now, almost July of 2024, to cross this review series off of my list, and then in the next couple of days we'll finally have that John Carpenter ranking. But today we are talking about what, as of now, is John Carpenter's final film, and that is The Ward from 2010. And this is a film that, honestly, I never heard of until years later. I don't remember any big hype or any advertisement with this thing coming out, like John Carpenter finally returning after nearly a decade. I don't remember any of that shit, so either I missed it, or this was something that was very quietly released, and only over time did people realize, holy shit, John Carpenter directed that? But essentially what you have here is Amber Heard as the lead, and she gets put into this loony bin in the 60s, I believe, and there's a bunch of girls there, and they're all being terrorized by this malevolent spirit that is one by one killing them off in various old school ways that fit a loony bin, that fit a mental hospital. And so they're not only trying to protect themselves, but figure out the origin of this haunting and what they can do to survive. So does this movie have some merit that leaves us salivating for the day that maybe John Carpenter will come back and direct one more film? Or does this just cement the fact that we just need to look back at the glory days and pretend that's all there ever was? Starting off with the positives, I love the location that they shot in for this movie. They used a real-life mental hospital that was sandwiched between a working hospital and a prison for the criminally insane. And so all through the movie, the atmosphere of a haunted, decrepit hospital is just on display with no effort whatsoever. Like, they were very lucky to be able to shoot where they shot. Now, I am somebody that I get a little bit more entertained and a little bit more impressed by mental wards and hospitals and horror movies than your average Joe. That is a setting that I just genuinely think is unnerving without any effort whatsoever, whether you're talking about The Exorcist 3 or Dream Warriors or anything like that. If you put it in a hospital, Halloween 2, another good example. If it's in a hospital, I'm already unnerved because I don't like going to hospitals. I don't like going to the doctor's offices. And for me, the magic of it is that without anything supernatural going on whatsoever, just showing the different rooms and corridors and soft rooms and the old rusty, leaky basements and stuff that they have in here, like that in of itself just makes me sit and squirm wondering what the fuck goes on in this place? Like who comes down here for a shot or for an exam? I also appreciate the fact that John Carpenter kept things reserved. You know, this was him trying to kind of dial back on the excesses a little bit, maybe after Ghosts of Mars didn't go over so well. So this is something more akin to early Carpenter work, where things are very minimalist, things are simple, things are practical. You know, there's not ghosts and CGI apparitions or whatever. The actual person who is haunting and killing these girls is a full practical makeup effect. And so I like that. I like that approach. And I think that despite how derivative this movie is, which we'll get into, that is something that makes it somewhat stand out amongst the dozens of other movies that does what this movie does. I also like the cast here. You know, Amber Heard is somebody that I certainly have numerous opinions on as a person, but as an actress, I always found her to be very good, and I'll give credit where credit is due. Bedshitter does a good job at leading this movie. You also have other side people that I've always enjoyed, like Danielle Panabaker, who I've always enjoyed in like The Flash and the Friday the 13th remake and a number of other things. You have Lindsay Fonseca in here for a very small role, who I loved in Nikita, and she had a small role in the Kick-Ass movies. I always thought she was a great actress. It's a shame we didn't see her do more things. Even Jared Harris as the lead doctor here. He is really good at that subtle change, that subtle difference in somebody that genuinely gives you the vibe that he's here to help, that he actually cares about these girls, with there being just enough off about him where you could see him ultimately being the villain or ultimately being a part of the evil at some point. So he's also somebody that has always been very good. So Carpenter has always been able to surround himself with great casts. I imagine even in 2010, anybody wanted to do a film with John Carpenter, so the cast does a great job. And that's about it. Moving on to the negatives. We'll start small and go big. I don't think the characters are very good here. The cast is good. The characters, however, are very one note. We don't really get to know too much about them. They pretty much just embody one character trait, which is a classic tool whenever the script doesn't really allow much time to actually do any character work. So you just get one little defining trait to define that person, and that's all that we get. And it always frustrates me. Even the lead in Amber Heard's character, aside from her being rebellious, by the end of the film, I don't really know jack shit about her. And there's somewhat, I guess, of an attempt to excuse all that away with the plot twist of this film, which we'll be discussing later on in the negatives, but it's not good enough for me to forgive. It's just a genuine issue with the movie. Characters kind of suck. It's also frustrating some of the lower budget movie tricks that Carpenter decided to use. Now, as I said, the setting here is effortlessly creepy, but there are some added effects in here to create more of an ambiance, to create more of an atmosphere that I don't feel like was even necessary, and I think are full-on overused here. Like, there's this lightning effect that is so blatantly obvious that it is just a strobe light stuck outside of a window that is just flashing constantly while stock thunder sounds are played throughout the film, and it is used so much, so frequently, and so fucking prominently and just unrelenting during the third act of this film that I'm like, dude, what fucking lightning storm is happening outside? Like, fuck the supernatural shit going on in here. There's an apocalypse happening outside these walls. I also could have used a bit more gore, you know. It is effective enough without it, but there's a number of things that happen here, like a gigantic spike getting stuck through the ocular cavities of a girl that has no blood whatsoever. And so I just missed that, you know. If we're gonna go simple, if we're gonna go more lower budget, if we're gonna go more reserved, cool, I'm with you. You do a great job at that. Carpenter always has, but it's 2010. Give me something. Little carnage candy can go a long motherfucking way. The setup, the periodic execution throughout the film of this central mystery is not really all that interesting. I mean, we kick this movie off by showing Amber Heard randomly set fire to some abandoned house, and then she just gets thrown into a loony bin. And right away you're like, really? Seems like an awful extreme charge for setting ablaze a building that nobody fucking lives in, but nonetheless, fine. We'll go along with that. And then we're stuck with these girls as one by one they get killed off by this malevolent spirit, and as we're starting to discover more and more details, like you find somebody's name scribbled on a drawing, and you find out something else, and then one of the girls says, oh yeah, that's a chick that was here before you, and we all just fucking killed her because we didn't like her. Like, every answer that we get, it's like, okay, I guess. It's not really that interesting, though. One of the absolute biggest issues with this film is that Carpenter is really nowhere in this movie. Aside from the tight execution of the movie, and aside from him utilizing the lower budget well and doing something very simple and reserved and just, you know, executing that fine, like, that shows Carpenter, I guess. But as far as his style, as far as the visual style, the attitude, the style of John Carpenter that is in every one of his movies, no matter how good, how bad, how crazy, how wacky, no matter what genre it is in, you can always watch a Carpenter film and feel Carpenter there somewhere. There's something in the movie that tells you, yes, that is the man that I know and love. The Ward is the least John Carpenter film that has ever been made. It genuinely feels like anybody could have directed this. Like, if we didn't know that John Carpenter directed this, if they didn't put that on the poster, if that wasn't, you know, common knowledge at this point, I would be shocked to find out that he was actually the one that directed this if I just randomly watched it one day on Cinemax or some shit. And part of the reason that it feels that way is because this movie is so fucking cliche-ridden and derivative that it is insane. Like, every single element of this movie resembles about half a dozen minimum other films that were released within the last 10 years in 2010. The way that it's shot, the vibe of the movie, some of the themes that it's exploring, even down to the just basic execution of casting the film. Like, sure, this is back in the 60s and it's a loony bin filled with these crazy ass chicks, so let's just cast a bunch of supermodels. Not to say that beautiful women can't be crazy, because we all know they can.
My dog stepped on a bee.
And even that element specifically feels like a product of the don't give a fuck attitude of John Carpenter. Like, the only actual interview that I could find where he was talking about this film, he made two statements. One of which was that he hated having to drive 40 minutes to location because it meant that he had to get up early, which is such a Carpenter thing to say. Like, what's one thing about your film? I fucking hated making it because I had to get up early, and coffee is just way better at 10 a.m. than it is at 6. But the other thing was that, it's the best, when you go off to this creepy location and you're surrounded by a bunch of beautiful Hollywood actresses, there's nothing better. But then you get to the ending, and the twist ending that this movie goes for, in 2010 was basically a full-on trope at that point. Like, it had already been done verbatim the way that this movie does it about 6 or 7 times in the early 2000s. I mean, whether you're talking about Identity, which this movie almost 100% rips off by the end of it. You have Hide and Seek. You have Secret Window. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on from movies from 2001 all the way up to like 2006 that did this to death. And this is 4 years later trying to do it again the exact same fucking way. Oh, she's got split personalities. So that's what's going on here. What? Which the ultimate shame of that is even the fact that it's cliched at that point. Take that out of it. If The Ward was released in 2001 and was the first movie of that era to undergo this split personality bullshit, it's not a good version of it, because it's not an interesting way to wrap up this story. It's not an answer to be given for this malevolent spirit that is killing all these girls that is satisfying. It just makes you go to the end of it and go, what the fuck was the point of the last 90 minutes? Like, the way that Identity visualized that storyline throughout the movie and then ultimately led up to that twist that this is all within a person's head and it's about the dominant personality trying to kill off all the other supplementary personalities. Like, it was fucking brilliant in Identity. Brilliant. You look at it in The Ward and it's like, dude, fuck you. You give me my money back and give me my 90 minutes back. How dare you? And again, the way that it's utilized in Identity is a downer ending. That's why it works. We have no attachment to what is ultimately revealed to be the main character. And so any emotional victory by the end of that film would be kind of empty, but it doesn't go for that. It goes for emotional devastation because the motherfucker wins. And then you get to The Ward and it's like, oh, so this chick that we were just introduced to in a flashback 15 minutes ago and have spent less than 3 minutes of screen time getting to know in The Ward, that's the person we're supposed to be emotionally invested in and feel this victory for and feel this resolution for in the end of the film. I don't know that bitch at all, so I don't care. And at the end of the day, that is what is most disappointing about The Ward. Like, take John Carpenter out of it. This is a passable, mediocre, forgettable, mid to late 2000s horror flick that would die in obscurity, and you would have about 3 people in the history of forever that would come up and be like its ultimate champions and defenders. But when you look at this as the final John Carpenter film, this is the period at the end of the sentence that is the career of the wonderful, great, genius, brilliant, influential god that is John Carpenter. And it makes everything that is mediocre and passable about this movie become infuriating and insulting. And honestly, it just feels like Carpenter wasn't really that passionate about this. Maybe he just did it for a paycheck. Maybe he did it because he was bored. Maybe he did it just for fucking shits and giggles. Let me go out and just make a movie with some hot blonde chicks. I don't know. Like I said, the interview that I found did nothing but solidify the fact that he does not give a fuck and probably did not give a fuck about this movie, which, whatever. I love and respect that about John Carpenter because he owns it and he does not hide it, and fuck anybody that has a problem with it. I'm John Carpenter, bitch. I can say and do what I want at this point. Love all of that. But that doesn't excuse the movie. That doesn't excuse what we got, and that doesn't excuse the fact that this is the final, possibly the final John Carpenter film. In the end, guys, if you've never seen The Ward, it's okay. Like, it's fine. It's passable. It's competent enough. It has a couple of little things going for it. It's watchable. But the fact that it's John Carpenter that made it is just the worst part about it. This is a movie that we should discover and then look at the credits and see a name under the director that we've never fucking heard of since. Or this is somebody that did this passionless, soulless studio job just to get into the system, and then suddenly everything they made after that was awesome. And you're like, yeah, but that first one, the fuck happened there? Like, it's one of those types of films. Being the last John Carpenter film, that's the worst thing about The Ward. And all I can hope for is that one day a script comes along and John Carpenter gets that fire lit under his ass and says, you know what? The Ward and Ghosts of Mars cannot be the end of my legacy. I'm going to give you all one more fucking banger. That's the reality I want to live in. That's the reality I hope we're living in. But that's it for this one, guys. That is the end of the John Carpenter review series. If you guys want to check out every movie in this review series, please click over here. And I'm also going to put my Wes Craven ranking up here. If you like horror directors, please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the John Carpenter ranking in a couple of days. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.